As you know, Chris Bruckmann and Laura Bach represented the government in prosecuting Daron Wint, and a year after the trial ended, Chris moved from the U.S. Attorney's Office, where he was deputy chief of the felony trial unit, to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, where he's the supervisory trial counsel. This is giving me reverb. Okay. Laura Bach is the deputy chief of the homicide section of the U.S. Attorney's Office of the District of Columbia, where we are sitting now, and we're going to start with trial preparation and how this affected your lives. How much time did you guys get? When did you learn you had this case, and how much time did you have to prepare?
So I worked on the case from the very beginning with a colleague of mine, Emily Miller, who played a large part in the investigation. So I would say within a day or two, not even a day or two, the day of the fire, we were both involved. Chris, I pulled in much closer to trial.
It's like May,
because Emily wasn't available to go and try the case with me. So Chris jumped on board a few months before trial.
And then, is there any balancing your life and a trial of this magnitude, or not really? I mean, did you guys what did you do to just put your personal lives on hold?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I remember, I think it was the day after July 4th, it was sort of, we hit full gear, and it was nonstop from then until the end of the trial at the end of October. And so it was in the office every day, Saturdays and Sundays, long hours. Laura's just about the only person who gets into the office earlier than I do. You know, I would get into the office at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and she was already there. And it was just full steam from then on, and it takes a toll.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, you basically try to prepare your family for it, and then you just check out, which is not always great, but it's what you have to do.
And obviously, you are an incredibly accomplished prosecutor, but I want you to describe Laura and her style, because she won't, and then vice versa. Because there were points in this trial where you really had to kind of go out on a limb, and especially when you didn't know what Daron was going to say. As one of the examples. But Chris, can you describe how she is sort of a bulldog in the ring there?
Her cross-examination of Wint was absolutely stunning. I mean, she took an entire day. We had overnight to prepare, and she took an entire day the next day just dismantling him piece by piece and teaching the jury that everything he said was just a story he had constructed based on the evidence that we had collected. That he knew he gets, as every defendant is entitled to get, what evidence we had, and then he just built a story around that, and she dismantled it piece by piece. And I remember when she was done, I grabbed a couple of the interns who'd been helping us out and, you know, dragged them out into the hallway and just made sure that they understood, like, they could practice law for 40 years and never see something like that again. It was absolutely incredible.
Did you feel people watching you? I mean, because people came in for the closings to see.
Yeah, you definitely feel people watching you. And just for the record, I haven't been doing this for 40 years.
I'd say they could start.
Okay.
And spend their whole career. I know
just
you
want to make that clear.
See, she doesn't let anything slip.
But this is exactly what you need in a trial partner, because you do feel people watching you, and there was enormous pressure, not you know, win or lose pressure, but you know, you feel the weight of the family on you when you're doing these types of cases, and you second guess every single thing you do, every question you ask. And honestly, you need someone like Chris who's going to sit there and keep you focused, because I will be all over the place, like, oh, I should have done this, I didn't do this, why didn't we do this? And he would bring you back down. And so I needed an equal in the courtroom, and I really felt like I got that. Not someone that I had to baby or train. It was somebody I could just, okay, you do this half, I'm doing this half, and get it right. And I knew he would, and so that made things a lot easier.
Do you want someone who thinks differently than you?
Oh, of course.
Just to kind of bounce ideas off of, but I imagine also to, like you said, keep you
absolutely.
straight.
Absolutely. I mean, and you know, again, I go back to Emily. Emily was a huge part of this investigation, and you know, we had very different styles in investigating, and a lot of things I would have blown past, she was much more methodical with, and I think that really works. In a courtroom, I'm sort of blah, and I need someone who's going to be like, focus, pick the exhibits, do this, do that, and Chris definitely brought that to the table.
As far as working with the detectives, is it a very symbiotic relationship where you're constantly calling, or is it sort of like, here's the case and they hand it to you and then you have what you have to work with?
Not in homicides, and certainly not with the detectives that we worked with here. This was the major case squad. They're the best MPD has, and they always have been. I mean, they're very, very experienced. We had amazing MPD detectives, and then the ATF has a task force, and because arson was involved in this, we then had the benefit of those folks from the ATF, other federal law enforcement partners, and Prince George's County is actually connected into that task force, which made this entire investigation run more smoothly because we had such a cross between DC and PG County.
Moving to litigation. When the trial began, you were aware that Daron's attorneys were going to introduce the Winfield defense, correct? But did you have any heads up as to who he would be blaming?
The only heads up we had is Judge McKenna ruled before the trial that we weren't entitled to know who it was, and we would suffer no prejudice because it was a name we were already familiar with from the evidence we had disclosed.
Can you say that in English?
Yeah, so it was somebody whose name was already in all the materials we had. So it was not going to be someone we had never heard of who we needed to find out who they were, where did they live, how could they possibly be connected to this, and be doing that kind of research.
So that narrows the scope for you
Right.
and who you can expect.
To about 100,000 pages, yes.
Yeah.
There were a lot of names.
And I know Jordan Wallace was initially kind of the obvious person you'd think they'd blame because he delivered the money and he was part of that day. But was it a surprise to you when you learned that Daron was blaming his brothers?
I think certainly that he blamed both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Stefan in particular, there's really nothing connecting him to this, and he has a great job and just presents well. It struck us as very odd that they'd included Stefan. Right.
He was also, Jordan Wallace again delivered the money, but pretty quickly he was cleared of any wrongdoing. It just seems weird, like who drops off a bag with $40,000? But apparently it wasn't that unique, is what the testimony showed. With respect to Darrell, again, he's with Daron Wint when he is arrested, so you would think maybe Darrell, but everything we had from the family and from the evidence was that Stefan not only was just a really good guy, but he was always looking out for his family, to include Daron Wint. So it was sort of a double, blow, I think, when he accused him.
And I think your point that you brought up that he had blamed him before when he got pulled over, it was such a small anecdote, but that had such an effect. It's like, this isn't the first time that you get in trouble. And for a lot of people, getting pulled over is about as in trouble as they get. Your heart's racing. And so the fact that he would immediately go to Stefan.
Well, sure. It's just like a kid. If you ask your kid who did this and they always blame their cousin or their sister or their brother, you're going to start to question it. And that seemed to be Daron Wint's go-to story.
But the mitochondrial DNA, because they were brothers, I'm guessing you prepared for it, correct? That possibility that they were going to blame Stefan, because the DNA wouldn't have matched anybody else.
Maybe we should have. I don't know that we did.
We knew the possibility of him blaming his brothers because of the DNA, but I think even though we knew it was theoretically possible, we were really quite surprised that they blamed Stefan.
But you're finding that out on day one.
Yes.
So then do you have to just sort of rejigger your whole approach, or is it you're going to stay with the same approach, but then sort of, we have to tie this in? Or I just imagine intellectually that's really a huge hurdle.
So I don't know. Our job still hadn't changed. Our job was still to present the evidence and show that it was Daron Wint. And so that didn't change at all. But I do think, it then brought Stefan to the forefront. And so we then started scrambling for some more things. You don't think that you necessarily need to alibi Stefan because he didn't do it. It was clear to us he didn't do it. But so then you start getting that information. Maybe we wouldn't have done that before if they hadn't blamed him.
And then the question I would think would be, how much time am I going to spend on this? Alibying the brothers versus going after the defendant. How much of that falls on you to sort of satisfy the jury, if you will? Mm-hmm. Was that part of the calculus?
That's always part of the calculus when you're looking at any defense that they're putting up, is how much do you want to do in your case and how much do you want to wait to sort of see what they do. And generally we try and make the defense actually put up the defense and stick to something specific before we do too much to come back and rebut it, because otherwise you're fighting straw men and they could pivot and do something different. I had a different trial where they changed essentially mid-trial from it wasn't him to he did it in self-defense. So yeah, it didn't go so well for them when they changed that way. But you want to make them actually put up what their defense is before you spend too much effort responding to it.
Right. And if you remember, I remember in the very beginning, Jordan was one of our first witnesses, and the defense tried to link him to some of the young women who were with Daron Wint when he was arrested. And so in the very beginning, it really did look like they were trying to point the finger at Jordan for a little bit. And I know that's one of the things we addressed in closing, because it was like, well, wait a minute, you know, defense counsel stood up and was trying to point the finger at Jordan Wallace, but when Daron Wint testified, it was all the brothers. And so that was part of it as well. We didn't know exactly what the defense was going to be until he testified. We didn't know how he was going to try to pull his brothers in until he testified.
Have you gone up against Judy Pipe before when she was an attorney?
Yes.
Did you see any patterns there? I mean, did you kind of know what to expect, or it's a totally different case, so you have no idea?
I will say this, Judy Pipe and Jeff, I think they were both really, really good attorneys. I have no questions about how hard they fought for Daron Wint, regardless of what their feelings were. And I think they're two people that I always knew played by the rules, which makes trial a lot easier. They're going to fight you, but they play by the rules. And I think that makes it a much better experience.
Yeah, I mean, you see similarities in little things, just like the way they ask questions or the way they, go after certain witnesses. But like big strategic calls, it depends on the facts of the case. Like you can't say, oh, well, I'm always going to put up a Winfield defense in a murder case, because just sometimes it wouldn't make any sense. Because
there were some points where it felt almost unfair that they were poking holes where there really wasn't anything there. But I guess that's their job I'm not asking you to speak for the defense, but I guess that's their job to create that doubt for you to strike down the doubt.
I mean, sure. Look, whether people want to believe it or not, the last thing a prosecutor wants is to put someone in jail who's innocent, okay? And, I don't want to fight against people who aren't following the rules, but we do want you to fight us. We want you to push us. We want to make sure we're getting it right. And with Judy and Jeff, you didn't have to worry about that. But absolutely, it's their job to poke every hole. And, God forbid I ever found myself in that situation. I would want them doing it for me too.
Going back to Darrell, you didn't bring him in the case in chief. And did you feel like you needed to call him at all? And then was it strategic to wait then until rebuttal? Do you remember?
You remember how we started and I said you second guess every decision you make? That was a big one. You don't know what you should do. I mean, sure, the jury wants to know everything, right? They want to know everything. They want to hear from him. They want to hear from, Daron Wint's mother, brother, sister. I mean, they want to know everything because they want to understand. But at the same time, we had to wait and see what Daron Wint was going to say, because at least I don't think I really knew how he was going to try to implicate Darrell until we heard it out of his mouth.
Was Darrell, just I think for the listener's understanding and sort of peeling back the curtain a little bit, was he a difficult witness? Was he difficult to get to comply? Was there any reason? I mean, he wasn't a clean witness because he's had a couple of marks on his record before, but nothing that was relevant to this case.
No, I mean, none of our witnesses, none of us are ever completely clean, I guess. None of our witnesses are either. And all of this came out during the trial. Darrell had counsel, and I don't even remember how that happened. We may have sometimes when somebody comes in, you will, if you have concerns about, a possible Fifth Amendment right that may be implicated, you'll get them counsel before they even ask for it. And I think that's what happened. We were the ones who reached out. He had an attorney. He always showed up when he was asked. He never asked for any benefit from the government. He never asked for protection from prosecution.
Did that surprise you?
Oh, if he did it by himself without a lawyer, maybe I would have been concerned. But, for his lawyer to just say, look, there's nothing here, and I'm telling him he can go in and talk to you. That carries a lot of water, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Or a lot of weight.
This trial had DNA evidence, obviously, but it was largely based on circumstantial evidence, as Chris pointed out in the opening. How difficult does it make your job to convince the jury when you don't have the weapon or the smoking gun?
I mean, circumstantial cases are always challenging because we don't know what happened inside that house. We don't know what happened inside that house for 22 hours. We have snippets here and there of, a phone call that Zava made or voicemail he left for Jordan, things like that. But it's a complete black box, some of what was going on in there. And so to not only be able to convince the jury that Daron Wint did it, but to tell a story that they understand. Because if a jury doesn't understand the story of a criminal case, they're almost never going to convict. And so to be able to tell a story of what happened in this case was very challenging.
And you mentioned in our last conversation about how there were some 300 items of evidence that you guys had, which had been swabbed for DNA.
Yeah.
But at some point, you're overwhelming the jury, right? I mean, can you speak to that?
Yeah, no, it was something close, 300 items were tested for DNA, and that was a struggle sort of pre-trial thinking about how we're going to present that, because most of the time we might have 5 things that are tested. And so you have the DNA analyst talk about each of the 5 things and how they were tested and what the results mean. But I don't think the judge would have let us do it for all 300, and even if the judge had, the jury would have been bored to tears. So we were able to do a summary exhibit, which the rules of evidence permit, that listed sort of all 300 and what the results were. And the overwhelming majority of them were swabs from inside the house that showed the DNA of the family members, doorknobs and things like that. There's nothing interesting about it, but we wanted to show the jury how thorough the crime scene techs had been, how thorough the ATF had been in doing the DNA analysis, and that as they're testing, thing after thing, the only DNA that's popping up is the family and Daron Wint.
Right.
So we had them highlight the ones that were most important, the 5 that actually had Daron Wint's DNA on them, and the rest were essentially in a chart if they wanted to look at.
Yeah, and one thing I guess to sort of think about is that usually your crime scene, not usually, a lot of times your crime scene's outdoors. It's very brief. It's a drive-by shooting or something like that. You don't have a situation where you have 22 hours with these people all in a confined space. So that made it there was a significantly more DNA material for us to test. But again, we also had the benefit of the ATF in this case. One thing that people may not understand and fully grasp is there is no free lab for the government anymore, okay? So we can't take 500 swabs and send them to someone and they do the testing for free. We have to pay for each and every one. And so we have to justify why we're testing certain things. With the ATF, because they were involved, because of the fire, we had a lot more flexibility in how much we could test.
And this thought is just forming in my head, but it also gets, you did not find DNA from any other suspect. No. So it's not like you tested 5 things, but there could have been 300 other things that you didn't test that may have had somebody else's DNA on it. So it gets rid of that question.
Right. That somebody else was in there. And I think that helped us. I mean, Todd, one of the DNA technicians from the ATF was there. And he's all gloved up, he's all in the outfit, his hair, everything is covered, and he still somehow managed to leave a little bit of DNA when he sneezed or something. And that was part of the argument that we relied on in closing. According to Daron Wint, his brothers were in the house, yet they didn't leave any DNA.
At one point during the trial, Laura, you pulled out that piece of evidence from the can.
Oh, right.
That was sealed. Can you talk about that moment? Because I know you said you didn't necessarily plan it, but it was very impactful specifically because you're not only holding up a piece of evidence that looks charred, but the smell in the room.
So going back to things that I don't always think about, and I just do things in the moment, we had viewed all of the evidence. You always want to view all of your evidence before trial. And we had done that, but we did it in this massive warehouse, huge ceilings, everything else. Because the evidence in this case, or at least a lot of it, had flammable liquid gasoline on it, the way it gets stored, they don't put it in a box, they store it up in this paint can, basically. And if you can imagine something with biological material, and then all of that gasoline inside of a can for 3 years, the smell is overpowering. And, again, I didn't really think it through, even when my detective on the stand was like, it says there you shouldn't open that. And I was like, whatever. And then all of a sudden it hits you. And I mean, it struck me. I heard a couple of the jurors wince.
I don't know how you kept going. I mean, I was toward the back of the courtroom and I could smell it. So just to be holding it, I imagine, was really overpowering.
It was incredibly strong. More than anything, I remember just thinking, "Oh, you dummy! You shouldn't have opened up the can." And so I just wanted to get the can shut. But you know, I mean, look back when we used to PCP evidence has that kind of strong odor, and there have been times where even when it was sealed up, this was back before now they, I think, get rid of most of the liquid, but back in the olden days, like you would be holding a Ziploc baggie with the PCB and you could smell it. I guess you just sort of get used to not smelling it.
Yeah. I mean, it just gave a sense of place in a way that I don't think anything else could have, because sense of smell is so strong. But you could smell the gasoline. You could smell, I mean,
yes.
It really was effective. To Daron, were you surprised that he took the stand?
No, he had to, as soon as the opening happened, we both looked at one another and were like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to testify.
How did you know that?
Well, because there's no way the evidence could come in other than through him. There was no one else who could say that the brothers were involved, and the detail that they gave in their opening, we were, I mean, 100% certain that he was going to testify when they were done with their opening.
Because you guys had we didn't know what the evidence was.
Right.
You had the evidence and you knew nothing pointed to
Right.
the brothers, so he had to be the one.
Right, and the brothers certainly weren't going to take the stand and say it. I mean, you know, so it was pretty clear, I think, from right. And I remember when we walked out of court saying, I can't believe he's going to testify.
Well, it was also in the defense opening, they talked about how he was in a house somewhere else without Wi-Fi. It's like, they're witnesses at this point. We know what these witnesses could possibly say. None of these witnesses could possibly say that he was in a house somewhere else. Like, he's going to be the one who has to say that. So it was the not just that they blamed the brothers, they could have said, you'll see the actual evidence points to the brothers. And they could have just argued that from the DNA. But the level of detail they went into the opening, we were sure that he was going to testify.
That's fascinating. Because I was like, you know, calling Jack Moore, like my hair was on fire. You won't believe it, they're calling him. And you guys knew the whole time. Speaking of his alibi to Ed, who obviously Daron attempted to say he was at his house and there was no Wi-Fi and he was there during the overnight. Presumably you had no idea that he was relevant. And when they brought him up, trial closed that day, so you only had one night really to figure out who this guy was, and then you had the classic line, Ed is dead. I'm wondering if you loved that his name was Ed.
Well, you know, it's not that easy. I mean, we do have a lot of resources. We had a lot of people who were helping us, but it's not like Daron Wint had an address, right? He's giving us a description of an old guy named Ed who lives over by this gas station next to this, next to that. Fortunately, when you've been doing this a long time and you have great detectives, they know what gas station he's talking about. They can give you an address range, and then we can start digging things up. I remember, though, we also there was a report, a police report.
Shots fired.
Which was crazy. I mean, for there to have been a police report during the time he said he was, I mean, I was shocked. But I shouldn't have been, because that's, I guess, par for the course. When you're going to blame somebody or use somebody for an alibi, you pick the dead guy who can't come in.
But just to remind people, it was those shots fired that clearly he did not know what you were talking about.
Right.
But the fact that you had that to then prove that he didn't even hear anything.
Right.
Was... And
that just happened to be a report that we happened to find that night.
Were you like, this is a gift?
It was a bit of a gift. I mean, you don't usually find that, but... you know, the fact that Ed was no longer with us was useful too, because of course you blame the guy who can't come in and testify. Or not blame, but, you know, use him as your alibi.
Right. For both of you, who was the most challenging witness to question? Other than Daron.
I mean, you know, if you mean challenging in terms of like emotional toll, the family members. You know, I remember we finished with Claudia on a Thursday afternoon. We didn't have court on Friday, so that was sort of sending the jury home for the weekend. And I was talking with her about how familiar she was with the house, because she actually went there while her stepmother was being held inside, while Vera was being held inside with the Sophocleses. and all the guilt she felt from having been right outside and not having been able to figure out what was going on and stop it. And she had never been to the house before that day, before the day of the kidnapping, but she'd gone multiple times since then. And I wanted to bring that out so that she could, be explaining when she's talking about the side of the house and the back door and the front door, like this is something she was familiar with. She hadn't just seen it once. She really didn't know what she was talking about. And I asked her, well, why did you keep going back there? And she said, that's my graveyard. And I just about broke down, and you can't as the prosecutor in the courtroom. Like that can literally cause a mistrial. So I was actually digging my fingernails into my skin to keep from breaking down as I thanked her and told the judge that we were done for the day.
Is that why you used that line in your closing? That was the end of your closing.
Was it? I don't. Glad you remember.
I listened to it again last night, and that's how you ended. You said, that he is responsible for turning.
Oh, right, that home into a graveyard.
Yeah.
That's right. I do remember something along those lines.
For you I assume it was Daron, but
it was definitely Daron. I mean, same thing with the family members, Nellie. It's hard. It's also hard when you're questioning family members of Daron. I mean, for someone like Darrell or Stefan to keep their cool when they're looking at their brother, who they clearly love or loved, who's now just tried to blame them for murder. I mean, there's a lot of emotion going on there, and you're trying to keep them from sort of letting it overpower them. But it was probably Mr. Martin, Amy's dad. You become very close with the family. You see them every day. And at least for me, I knew how hard it was for him to be on the stand testifying to what he was testifying to. And, as long as he held it together, I would hold it together. But it's not easy.
Was it strategic? You just reminding me, in his testimony, he brought up that he gave Philip the baseball bat. And then that was one of the DNA items that was tested, and you had Vera's DNA on it. Was it sort of like in a narrative you wanted to bring that back in so that the
partly
evidence was part of the story?
Partly, but I just wanted folks to think about it in terms of this is a gift from a grandfather, and then it's used to kill somebody. I mean, a family member. And, we talk all the time about the guilt and things like that. And I remember when Mr. Martin told me that he had given Philip that bat, and just the look on his face, So, yeah, I wanted them to know. I wanted them to relate to it,
Yeah. At any point in the case, did you think you were losing?
So I always feel like I've lost the case after the defense closes. And, Judy Pipe is a great lawyer. And after her closing, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what have we done? We're gonna blow the whole thing. But then, you pull it back together. But other than that brief time, I mean, this was a great investigation. Law enforcement did a tremendous job. It was our job to get it across the finish line. Emily did a phenomenal investigation. So I do feel like it was a solid case. It was our case to screw up, which is a fair amount of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know, though, looking at the jury. It's not like you get to do polling along the way, like, how are you guys leaning? Like,
right.
Can you give us some feedback on what you'd like to hear? You try to watch them, you try and see if you can pick up clues in terms of body language and things like that, in terms of are they following along? And I remember one of the things that I took as a good sign was, we had 16 jurors, 12 regular, 4 alternate, and the alternates in DC don't know who they are, so they're all just paying attention as regular jurors. It was close to a 2-month trial, and not a single juror missed a single day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just you take any ordinary 16, group of 16 people at any workplace, someone's going to miss a day, across, a month and a half, 2 months. Nobody did. And to me, that showed how seriously they were taking it, how invested they were in getting it right. And I took that as a good sign for us. But you just don't know.
You mentioned to me that it struck you what Daron didn't say at the end of the trial, at sentencing.
At sentencing. He did not express any condolences for the family or what they had gone through. And in every violent crime trial I have ever been a part of, the defendant always says something at sentencing about how they feel so awful about what happened to the victim, even if they're still denying having done it. They'll say, what happened to, Mr. So-and-so was awful. That should not happen to anybody. It wasn't me, but I do feel terrible for what happened to him. even if only from their own self-interest of trying to make themselves look good to the judge. And Daron Wint didn't do that either with his own mouth or even through his attorneys. You know, some people are just nervous public speakers and they have their attorneys express that sentiment for them. That's fine. But it really struck us that he did not express any remorse of any kind or just empathy